Well, he's right here, so let's bring down the director, Nicolas Winding Refn. How you doing?
Hi.
Jet lagged?
No, you kind of like no time zone.
No time zone. Let's talk Neon Demon, your sexy and twisted and beautiful. I don't even know how to describe it. It's kind of everything. Your films have explored obviously a lot of masculinity, and this film seems like it's trying to explore femininity. Would you say that's fair?
I mean, I don't know if I explore it like literally, like I'm an investigator or I'm a scientist trying to analyze the DNA of it. I just tend to make films about what I would like to see, and in a way live out my fetish through what I do.
So your fetish here is?
Everything.
All right. Well, there's an eroticism obviously to this film. There's a sensuous quality. A lot of that is through its visuals. Do you want to talk about your visual approach to this film, metaphorically or otherwise?
Well, I had this idea that I wonder what it would be like having been born beautiful, because it's a subject everyone has an opinion about, and I believe that that a lot of us are the generation where we experienced the digital revolution, the idea that an alternate reality is more and more consuming our communication, our livelihood, how we view the world. And my children, who is starting to become teenagers, are the generation that uses this technology in almost world of normality. It's their way of living. But the generation after, I think that alternate reality will become no longer alternate because it will essentially become real. So the mutation of what we remember as real and the future of artificial will essentially join one world, become one reality.
Does the artificial then become like authentic?
In the end, I think that authenticity will essentially become the reality of an artificial idea. And so I was like, I wonder what it would be like then to be in a world where narcissism is accepted, where narcissism is a virtue, where narcissism is a quality. Because I grew up in the world of narcissism as a taboo. But strangely enough, creativity is all about narcissism and self-indulgence and all those beautiful things they criticize you for sometimes is what it's about. But in terms of how I can see the world of beauty, in that the acceptance of narcissism is almost an evolution of how we define human beings. That it's like going through a new way. We see it in our political structure. We see it in our current situation. We see it in our philosophical nature of how we define our evolution. And in a way, in the future, beauty will become one of the class marks that defines us as human beings. And to me, that subject was very intriguing because it all started with that I woke up one morning and I realized I wasn't born beautiful, but what my wife is, and I wondered what that would be like. And that gave me the idea to make this film.
And I suppose you see your children that way too.
Well, I'm very lucky that I have a very beautiful children, and my eldest, of course, has asked her mother if she can be a model, and my wife said, not yet. But but this idea of I would like to make a horror film about a teenager in the world of beauty probably comes from that. Something that it's for her generation in a way. And I didn't know quite how to trigger it until I met Elle Fanning. Because when I make films, it's all about who's going to be the protagonist, because that's going to be my alter ego. So whether it's Mads Mikkelsen or Tom Hardy, but especially Ryan Gosling, you know, it becomes very much about my inner mirror. And with Elle, there was no one else who could play the part, so I kind of had gambled on the film, because I had moved to LA as a family. We had put the kids in school. I'd started pre-production. I have scammed the French into giving me the money to make the movie without a script, promising them great quality, but I didn't have any cast. So the pressure was
Did you have a
on.
screenplay at that point?
I had various screenplays, and every time someone said they had read the script, I always said, no, you haven't, because it doesn't exist. So there was always this kind of secret movie that I didn't want to talk about. And then I was casting unknown actresses in Los Angeles because there was no one that had, I felt, the thing that the film needed. This uniqueness that would make it authentic, that everyone wanted to consume her. And I was getting pretty desperate. And then one day my wife started talking about Elle Fanning, because she had seen one of her latest films. And she was older than 10 in it. So, so I was like, well, maybe that's her then. And then I set up, I was able to get a meeting with Elle, and while I was waiting for the meeting to take place, her manager sends over a photo fashion shoot of Elle that she had done when she was like 15, I guess. And just instinctually it was like, that's her. And so she came to the house, and she was 16, and it's kind of a little bit awkward, because how do you talk to a 16-year-old? You know, I mean, my last conversation was with Ryan Gosling. How do I talk to this young lady? And so I openly said, look, I believe there's a 16-year-old girl in every man, and I would like to live out my version. She was okay with that, and I said, all right. And I would like to make a horror film about beauty. And she was okay. She could dig that, because she wanted to make a movie for her generation about beauty, because she was 16. And I said, that's a perfect match. Let's do it together. And she was okay. But there was still not that clarity of what it was going to be, because obviously she's going to ask, well, what's the film about?
Can I see the screenplay?
Well, that's too easy. What the film was going to be about, because I shoot in chronologically order, so everything obviously will change. And then I asked her, do you think you're beautiful? And she was, you know, very taken back. And I said, no, seriously, do you think you're beautiful? And she said, yes. And then it was just like, oh my God, that's the movie. The Birth of Narcissism. And then 8 weeks later we were shooting.
Wow. So you discover the movie in essentially that moment, or those moments. You have a screenplay, you have an idea of what it's going to be, but 8 weeks before shooting, click, you know what the movie is.
And then everything changes from day one.
Do you rewrite from there?
Very much, because when you shoot in chronologically order, the first couple of days, you try to find the balance in the characters and the performances, but then very quickly it starts to alternate, and then you just have to continue with the domino effect. And one of finding factors was that originally the movie had been protagonist, antagonist, which was Elle Fanning and Jena Malone. That character Jena Malone plays. But then I had taken the Jena Malone character and made it into 3 characters, with Jena Malone, Abby Lee, and Bella Heathcote. who would each kind of represent archetypes of beauty. So there was Abby Lee, the supermodel. There was Bella, who cosmetically alternated her beauty. And there was Jena Malone, who was all about inner beauty, the more complex, as we can say, even though shallowness is equally as complex. So it was a very complex spectrum. And beauty is an opinion that everyone very quickly will argue about, strangely enough. And so the film was going to follow Jesse, and then it was going to continue and so forth with all these characters simultaneously. And then it got time to do one of the scenes in the film, and that scene changed everything. And then I had to reconstruct the whole second half, but only within 2 weeks while I was still shooting. So it's like, you know, catching something that's like falling through your hands as liquid. But it's very exciting. I love fear.
Most filmmakers don't work like that. And most filmmakers probably don't like fear in that way.
I think it's the essence of creativity. It's beautiful. It's frightening. And it's terrible to be around other people. But it's what I love about creativity. It's that constant free fall. It's like, in a way, an infant doing a drawing.
It's first things, yeah. So you're more than content, or at least you can contain the mutations and work with the mutations, rather than someone who might be going, oh my God, this film's going out of control. Let's talk about the soundtrack, because the soundtrack to this movie is incredibly important, I think, and it's also quite amazing. What was your approach to that? What was, when you were working with Cliff? What was your sort of mandate there?
Well, there's two people around me that I always work with. One is Matt Newman, the editor, and then it's Cliff Martinez, the composer. And those are the first people that I call and talk about what I think I would like to do, and then we continue to talk about it. And with Cliff, music was so important for this film because it had to have a sense of unreality, but still be focused in a reality. So I made every image almost synthetic. I love digital. I think it's my favorite image. But I had these old lenses made that the photographer made that we were able to put on that gave it diffusion. And then I said to Cliff, and all the music needs to be completely unorganic, equally as synthetic as the images. So it would be like venturing into a fantasy world.
Do you explain themes with him, like narcissism and shallowness and things like that?
No, I just said to Cliff I wanted to make a movie about women, and he was like, okay.
Okay, maybe we should watch a clip from the film in case, I'm sure. How many people have seen the film? Okay, no spoilers. Yeah, let's watch a clip. I feel like if you guys saw that in context, you'd be laughing hysterically, as I was when I saw it. First of all, let's talk about Alessandro Nivola, who's terrific in this movie. And then, which I think people don't get, is your sense of humor, because I find that there's wonderful pieces of humor in this film that I think people miss.
I'm very funny. I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. It was a terrible acting school in Midtown Manhattan. It really was. And I was told by one of the acting teachers that I had a great sense of humor.
This is what I'm talking about. Let's talk Alessandro then.
Well, Alessandro Nivola was actually auditioning for another character in the movie. But because he was doing a play, he couldn't make the dates work because it was all in chronological order. But he was so good that I asked him if we could maybe take another character in the film and make that a bigger character. and that would be then this designer character, and he agreed, which was great because it was a wonderful experience to work with him, and a lot of the dialogue essentially was like me improvising on it, and then we would write it down, which was very funny. He says a lot of very funny things.
He does. I'm going to circle back a little bit because we were something you mentioned there made me think about femininity and not the exploration because you weren't a scientist, but just the idea of it, because you've got 2 female writers on this film. You've got a female DP, which is fairly rare. Obviously, there's women throughout the film. Can you talk about, and I think from what I heard, there's a lot of a female crew on this, which is fairly rare as well. Can you talk about that and how that impacts the movie? And
Well, I love women. I think women are so much more advanced than men, and I love being around women a lot more. And I'm controlled by women at home, and I submit to that very happily. See, I wanted to make a movie where men had no function. And it was like, what's beyond feminism? And so I designed all the male characters as the girlfriends of other movies. You know, they're just like, they're for plot devices, which unfortunately is true a lot of the times. So the joke that Elle and I always had was, here comes the girlfriends, and they're gonna come in and explain the scene, and they're gonna walk out again. And then halfway through the film, even though there were scenes with them later on, I eliminated them because I had no interest, not in them, but the film had no interest in its DNA. It solely just became about women.
I want to talk, I guess, a little bit also about your female DP, because this movie's gorgeous. The images captured are stunning, and it reminds me as if Gaspar Noé in a dance party met with Stanley Kubrick's cinematographer and had some sort of mutation.
Well, I make very inexpensive movies, but it allows me complete control. But in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of, not a lot, but a few fashion campaigns, and you get to work with great photographers on that because they have the money. And every time I would do something, these very high-end photographers, who I won't mention by name, would always say to me, "Oh my God, we're such fans. We would love to work with you." They're usually European, so they speak in accents, but I'm not going to do that. And it was just like, you know, these people are the masters of cinema. So I was like, oh wow, I'm in the club now. I can like call people and pull in favors. So anyway, so I'm in LA and I'm like setting up this movie, and the casting is going pretty well because I got Elle, and then Keanu Reeves agrees to be in the movie, and Abby Lee I cast her, and it's really going good. And so I call one of these photographers and say, great, you know, we're on, you know, we're going to be shooting right after Christmas. They're like, oh, fantastic. They're so excited. And I say, well, but just one thing. I mean, it only pays $3,000 a week. They're like, oh, no, can't happen. It's like, fuck. I thought it was going to be so easy because, I mean, I'm supposed to be like a great visual filmmaker. And so they start turning me down. And after like the 6th photographer turning me down, and I'm starting to go to like up and coming people in LA, and I'm still getting no's, I'm like, I don't know what to do. And like, it's easier for me to cast a movie star than it is to get a fucking DP. And we had the same problem with production design because I had shaved the budget so low because I wanted 7 weeks of shoot, so all the departments were really condensed. And people would say, but I don't have money for this and I have money for that. I'm saying, yes, but isn't that great? That's creativity. Then we'll imagine it, we'll come up with it. And they're like, come on, let's go do it. And no, not possible. So after my 7th probably being turned down by this photographer who I'm trying to sell on the phone, I'm like trying to sell them on the movie. The agent of that photographer calls back and says, and I go, oh, wasn't that great with that guy? And it sounds like he's going to do it. He's like, no, he's not going to do it. All right. And he goes, but what about Natasha Bray? And I said, I don't know who that is. But at that time I was looking at anyone, like they could be from Uzbekistan calling something, I couldn't care less. I was willing to meet with anyone. And so he says, well, I said, is she free? Yes. Is she in LA? Yes. Good. Can you send me a link and then I'll meet her tomorrow? And then they send me a link and her commercial reel and things are there. And I hadn't seen the rover, which she had photographed, and I didn't have time to do it. So I just saw something she had done with Lynn Ramsey for the Olympics in the UK, and had a very, very film school style of black and white and very, 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 very artistic. But certainly somebody that had a good eye for contrast, because I like to frame, but I'm colorblind, so she had a very good sense of contrast, and it was a black and white thing. So anyway, so Natasha comes over the next day, and she's not a very tall girl, and we're talking, and I got a really good feel for her, like instinctually, and I feel that bringing a woman on as a photographer about women would just be probably a really smart idea. So I go, after about like the usual chit chat, I go, okay, let me be honest with you. Would you work for $3,000 a week? And she goes, isn't that something you should talk to my agent? I said, look, just fuck that. Would you work for $3,000 a week? She goes, yeah. I go, great, you're hired.
I was thinking there for a second about, I almost wanted to stop you. You're colorblind, and yet your films are extremely colorful. How does that work? And also, let's talk about the color red, because red is just kind of everything in your films, especially this one.
Well, I love color, and I love a lot of it, and I can't get enough. And when you're colorblind, apparently, I'm told, I can't see mid-colors. So I want everything to be more colorful, and so I can feel them. It's a little tricky for people like Natasha, who would go on and talk about all the various color palettes that she's doing, and I'm like, that's great, I can't see it. So you gotta make it so I can see it. And that's what's beautiful in post-production nowadays. You can do so many things in post-production. That's really where I find the look of the movie. But she had the elements, of course, there. But yeah, I mean, colorblind is a beautiful thing to have, and I wish everyone had it.
I wanted to go back to, I love the way you speak about the invention of the film. And it almost strikes me as sometimes titles inspire you, and that's maybe the film or something. I remember I actually spoke to you a long time ago around Valhalla Rising, and you had said, I have a film that I want to do called Only God Forgives, but I'm not quite sure what it is. And it almost reminds me of what you're talking about now. I have an idea, I have a title, and then you maybe gestate. I don't know, how does that work?
Well, it's like kind of like inspiration can come from so many different ways, at least in my world, that it can be me doing the dishes in the mundane way that I live, and I go, oh, that could be an interesting idea, or could I see something, or I hear something, and and then it starts to kind of slowly evolve into, and then sometimes it could be a title or a word game, like the Neon Demon title was, because I kept on not having a title for this script that didn't exist for this movie that no one knows if it was going to happen or not. And the title I came up with one night when I was playing a word game, because I'm also very dyslexic, so it had to be words I could both read and spell. So neon, I love because it reminds me of my youth in New York. I grew up in New York in the 80s. And there's also some science fiction feel to it, but there's also a sense of strong retro. It's organic in a way, even though it's synthetic. And then I thought demon, because it had to have a horror feel, because it had to be a horror film. And then the neon demon. So that was pretty groovy. Then I asked my wife, and she thought it was pretty cool.
I like the idea of neon being sort of, I guess what you're saying, like futuristic and retro at the same time, maybe like something like Blade Runner or something.
Yeah, I mean, or that whole, I mean, there was a movie called Liquid Sky. I don't know if anyone's ever seen, which is like a really beautiful film about the kind of new wave, no hope, like post-punk, pre-romantic punk scene in New York that was made in the early 80s. It had a lot of neon in it, and I always remember liking all those strange rectangular things and the movement around of them, and you can kind of look at them in strange ways, and they had lines and things like that. I thought that was pretty groovy. Was that kind of a formative influence for you, like no wave and New York music at that time? Well, I was a huge club kid, so I would all my life was about going to clubs, and I was like 15, and I had a curfew at midnight because I had good, healthy parents that loved me. But I had friends who had evil parents who didn't care about them, and they could stay out all night. So I hung out with them, said I was sleeping at their house, and we would go to, like Save the Robots, when it was an after-hours club, or I remember Danceteria on 21st Street, and Palladium opened, and, all those. That kind of science fiction sensuality of walking into this alternate world where there was no gender, there was no sexuality specifically other than whatever you were into, and there was any chemicals you want. I never did drugs. I was always too afraid of them. So I didn't get drunk until I was 17 when I came back to Copenhagen. And so I was always a voyeur in that world. I didn't get a girlfriend until I was 24. So I've always liked the idea of looking, of seeing. I feel like you're explaining Neon Demon, and then I feel like you're also explaining all your films just based on the club experience. I can think of the idea of you walking into a club, the music is throbbing, the lights are going, and that's. It was thrilling. It was always being, and especially when you're a club kid, you were in the elite club. You were part of the pack, Right. When you see Neon Demon, this will really coalesce. And so did you, when you were in New York, you said that, those formative years, did you, was that like early 80s, the late 70s, sort of scuzzy New York, the genre films and all that, did you get to take in that stuff as well? I was way too young. I came into New York in 78 when I was 8 years old, so I didn't experience 42nd Street. I didn't experience that whole, but I did remember that, like, my mother took me to see Hard Day's Night down at Bleecker Street Cinema, and I do have these kind of memories of. And then what's great about New York back then was there was so much alternative culture, and there was so much going on. It wasn't corporate America. It was still dirty and filthy and degenerate, but it was also beautiful and exciting. And I'm so happy to have experienced that, because it really defined who I am, and also the notion that I don't want to be normal. Fuck that, What's so great about that? It was a great, wonderful world into the counterculture, because my schooling was dyslexia, which is really embarrassing and terrible to go through, and I was able to that world embraced me, and I embraced it. Everything that was counterculture, I was into, and of course the music scene at that time was very exciting. It was post, punk, but it was still a lot of glam. And it had an influence from the British New Romantics were coming in, but a lot of stuff was still going on in the musical scene in New York at that time. Did you, I guess, you answered that. So, but later in life, it seems like genre is very much your thing. Did you get to explore some of those films? Like, I feel like William Lustig and those kinds of things would be very much up your alley. Well, I know Bill Lustig because I very much like a movie called Maniac. But I loved everything that was rebellious in terms of genre because it was the only way to piss off my mother. See, my mother and stepfather were like really well brought up Scandinavian high-end hippies, which means that let's share, just not my money. And so I grew up in a penthouse, like duplex, but with a very socialistic mentality. And the only thing that could really rebel, because musically I couldn't do anything because my mother had photographed like Jimi Hendrix and Miles Davis, so there was nothing there. And politically they've gone through the whole socialistic movement of...
They're enlightened.
Yeah, you know, Bernie Sanders and shit. So, the only way to really make them angry was violent genre movies, like you know, I remember my mother freaked out when I kind of had manipulated my nanny into buying Escape from New York in VHS, so they didn't like that, and then Ronald Reagan. So I began a long fetish for Ronald Reagan since I was 14.
Okay, how does that manifest itself in film then?
Well, because creativity is, in a way, pure capitalism, is unregulated, unadulterated insanity, and the more you try to control it, the less interesting it actually is.
Pretty fascinating. All right, let's take another clip from the film. I love how that's a great example of how she's sort of naive and Pollyannish, but then there's the sort of calculated thing that she has, and I guess that's pretty intrinsic to the film. I also want to talk about a little bit about the, without giving too much away, the sort of engulfing, enrapturing quality of the film that's even, in a way, maybe a little vampiric, people wanting, desiring things from you, the quality that you feel throughout the entire film. Can you talk a little bit about that?
How?
What was your aim with that?
I thought it could be interesting with the obsession that we have about beauty has only gone up. It's never going to go down. It's only gone up. It's the one stock that's never gone down. But the longevity of beauty continues to shrink. And it's becoming younger and younger. So I thought, well, what's going to happen when that circle is completed? You know, what's going to take place? And the only thing I could think of was consuming. And I thought, oh, that's interesting.
You've always talked about sex as violence or violence as sex. I don't remember the exact quote, and I feel like it's almost culminated here. Was that an aim as well, like taking those themes? How do you see it? I forget that the quote is sex as violence, or...
Well, I don't know the quote, but I can say that the act of violence is really more effective when you sexualize it. So, but sex and death is, of course, the essentials to our creativity. You know, it boils down to those two very pure meanings. Then we can define it and infiltrate it, but it all comes back. If you look at the Renaissance, if you look at creativity in paintings and in sculpturing, you know, the skull next to a pair of roses was a very common motif, especially in the modernists. And so I very much try to concentrate, narrow down to essential thing of well, sex and violence is what our primal instincts are based on, even before it's intellectualized. How primal can you then create from, so that the act of creativity becomes an act of violation, but it doesn't destroy you. It's meant to penetrate your mind in order to give you a reactionary experience. So it becomes a violent emotion, whether it's good and bad. I don't fucking care. That's irrelevant to me. We're beyond that. I mean, the future of entertainment is the ecosystem of the future of entertainment is completely, it has different rules than our previous ecosystem. You know, if you look at entertainment as film, as a mass media, when it was invented as a trick, it was invented as an experiment that became an artistic canvas that was consumed into mass media and became the first true mass entertainment. And it flourished creatively, but also flourished economically. And then it became controlled by very few people would control who made it, who distributed, who was in it, who was allowed even to have an opinion about it, whether it was because out of moral judgments or out of the notion that there would be good or bad quality control. And that worked very well for a number of years, and then television was invented. But television's pure function was essentially a financial possibility. Because with television came a whole new way of capitalizing as mass entertainment. And it continued to grow as a financial institution with creativity as a secondary choice. We had various revolutions throughout, but in the end it always came back to money. And then we had, of course, the invention of the VHS, which was the first time that the industry let loose its control, and control was given to the consumer. Consumers could suddenly define length and speed. And then you had the DVD, which was the gold rush of entertainment, because suddenly what was considered like history and like worth of nothing suddenly became profitable again. So it cannibalized on its origin. And then it ended through the perfection of the Hollywood machinery that dominates 90% of our industry in a wonderful way. You know, I love those movies, but it's to a perfect stock of money interest. It's all it comes down to, essentially. I find that very fascinating, and I think it's very, very good at what it does. It's a wonderful investment of capitalists to regain more financial gain. But the origin of cinema has been kind of phased out slowly through that process. And that means that cinema has stagnated as an art form. But then we were lucky when anything does stagnation, a revolution happens, and it was the digital revolution. The digital revolution, which we're now seeing becoming the new canvas, it's now starting to become a perfect arena because we know that it's the reality. We have accepted the outcome of it and the effect it has on our old ecosystem. So now we're going into this new ecosystem, but a lot of people are still trying to apply the same rules. And you can't, because the new system is the modernists versus the classics. And the new system, there is no regulation, even though you try to. There is no control, because everything is possible, everything's accessible. Opinions are oblivious, because there's an audience for everything. It's just become a mass noise. But what's beautiful about that, it has gone back to the origins of creativity, which is an act of movement. And in this world that is so beautiful, it's really not about what you do anymore. It's about what you stand for. So the essence of creativity has gone down to its primal instinct, which is just movement. And whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter. But if you react to it, that's what's going to move everything forward.
You should teach. I've really hogged Nicolas because I always find talking to him fascinating, but I think we have time for like one or two questions. Yes.
I had the pleasure of seeing it last night, and if you haven't seen it, sort of, it's really, and I found it actually very funny.
Oh, Thank you. It is very funny.
That's what I thought. I was all laughing. I'm like, oh, I guess it's just me.
It's very campy.
I was wondering if you wouldn't mind saying what that scene was that was so pivotal for you that shifted everything in the second half. I don't know if that'll give away information.
It involved Jena Malone and another body.
Got it.
She knows.
Oh, okay. I'll take who's got another question? Yes, sir.
I'm wondering if you can speak to like specific influences that you had, like from maybe other movies or directors or other music or just other art forms that kind of like inspired you along to the creativity process.
Well, of course, I'm a child of cinema. So when I grew up, I watched everything under the moon. And, you know, we all steal. I mean, if anyone tells you they're not stealing, they're lying. So everyone steals, you know. And I think that I became very interested in the idea of installation, but I'm not a big museum guy or anything, but I thought it was the idea of music and movement became what I'm mostly interested in. I just stay at home and I don't drink alcohol and I, you know, by the time the kids are in bed by 9 o'clock and my wife goes to bed around 9:30 because she's an A person, she wakes up really early at night or in the morning, and it kind of, those are my hours of solitude, and that's, you know, I'll walk around, I'll sit down, maybe I'll watch the news, and then usually I get some kind of an idea, and I've stopped trying to figure out where it comes from because, you know, it finally it doesn't help it, but, you know, with when we did this movie, when I was trying to explain the idea of a woman film about women to Elle, I gave her Valley of the Dolls to watch. You know, as I said, this is a very interesting example of a film that walks many lines. And then I gave her a movie Night Tide by Curtis Harrington, which is a movie with Dennis Hopper, a film that I love so much that I bought the rights to it from a private collection. I'm a collector. I love to collect things. I collect toys and
Are you going to put it
other
out?
stuff. What?
Are you going to put it out again?
Well, I don't. Maybe right now it's just nice to own it.
One more question. Yes.
What informs you most, would you say, during your creative process to help you make the choices that you make?
That I leave myself open to complete constant failure, so it forces me to rely only on my instincts, and I make every movie as if it's going to be my last movie, because if it is going to be my last movie, they weren't going to get me.
That's pretty perfect. Thank you so much for coming out. Thanks to Nicolas Winding Refn for being here. Thank you.